Okay, then I will just share the screen. Do you have any questions in the last lecture? So I stopped here at the fluorographene. So we were thinking of different ways of modifying graphene. So we have learned about hydrogenation. So we say the converted graphene is a graphene, just like alkene. So, but we found hydrogenation is not that strong because they are not chemically bonded. That's what our inference. But from the paper, it seems like they have made a chemical bond. But all the experimental evidences show the other way. That it is just physically bonded. The hydrogen atom is physically bonded to graphene. Okay, but so now if I ask you what are the evidences that we say that it is just physical bond, so we try to understand based on the different characterization tools. We said the lattice constant is supposed to increase, but we found the opposite. And also the sorry, going that way. So we had several evidences like band gap, for example. So there is not really a band gap. So it is expected to be 4.5 electron volt. It is supposed to be optically transparent because the optical energy range is from 1.8 electron volt to 3.3 electron volt. So if it has a band gap of 4.5 electron volt, it should be transparent. Okay. But what we really see is not transparent. We see that the Dirac point is shifted as if like there is some hole doping. That's what we have seen. Maybe I can, so I hope you understand because last time I shared the PPT. So maybe I can show you one more time. So let me share. Where is PPT? Yes. Yeah, so we had different evidences. So for example, this one. So we said there is not really a band gap, change or inducing a band gap, but there is a hole doping because the Dirac point is shifted now. It is broadened and shifted. Okay, so this broadening could be because of various reasons. So if the electrical engineers will understand this in terms of the field effect mobility, because that the slope essentially gives the field effect mobility. So there is a change in the field effect mobility. Okay, once the hole doping is done, that is for sure. But again, the problem is that after annealing, so if there is a chemical bond, typical temperature used for annealing is from room temperature to 400 degrees Celsius. Okay, moderately high temperature, not very high temperature, but moderately high. So we expect that these chemical bonds cannot, be broken with these moderate temperatures. So, but what we see is that it is reversible. This process is reversible. So it's called reversible hydrogenation. You can remove hydrogen atom from the graphene. Okay, from the graphene lattice. So if it is chemically bonded, we should not have any reversible lattice. That means that it should not return to graphene lattice. It should be irreversible. Okay, so these evidences show that this is not really a hydrogenation, but it is a kind of physical bond. Okay, there is some charge transfer. Okay, the hydrogen atom, hydrogen ion is taking, it's not actually hydrogen atom, but it is hydrogen ions because you make this hydrogenated graphene through plasma process. Okay, the plasma means it has electrons and hydrogen ions. So they can easily take electrons from graphene and that will induce holes in graphene. So it is basically hole doped graphene. So you can see the Dirac point is shifted to the right. So this is an example of hole doped graphene. So after annealing, you see, actually it is coming back, but not exactly similar to what before annealing. Okay, so this is before annealing, this is after hydrogenation, and this is after annealing. Okay, we are trying to remove hydrogen. It's partially recovered, it's not fully recovered. So there could be some chemical bonds, but majority seems like is against the hydrogenation process. Okay, the chemical bond is absence of chemical bond. Yeah, so we said several things, and this is about the fluorination. So in fluorination, what we use is XeFe2. Okay, this is just 1 minute. So let me go back to the other one. So this is what we have. So we concluded that there is no hydrogenation. So it is not a graphene. It is still graphene, but with some charge transfer. So hydrogen ions actually make some physical bond, not chemical bonds. This is what we have. So all the evidences show the presence of physical bonds. Okay. So we have taken one more example. So this is true for other 2D materials also. So you have to look for what is the free orbital and whether you can attach something with that. So that is what you have to see. So I just took an example of graphene, but you could do functionalization many other 2D materials. So that is the beauty of 2D materials. Okay, but it all depends on the available orbitals. Okay, so I'm just taking the example of graphene, but you could generalize it to many other 2D materials. Because this is actually well understood now in the case of graphene, but other 2D materials still exploring. So that is why I'm not discussing that. But as a researcher, you may try some of these properties. So another example is fluorographene. So we are trying to modify graphene by attaching fluorine. Okay, so this is generally done through xenon difluoride. All right. So now what are the evidences? So we have to look for evidences for the chemical or physical bond. So now, so the theoretical study shows that it should have band gap of something like 3.7, 3.4, 3.7. I think I have the PPT, I'll show you in a minute. So you expect that this should be transparent, just like what I mentioned before. It should be optically transparent. So if you plot absorbance or absorption versus energy along the x-axis and absorption coefficient along the y-axis, if it is below the band gap, then there is no absorption. So as soon as the photon enters into means it is actually the electron hole pair generation. Okay, so once the wavelength of the photon or energy of the photon matches with the band gap, it can be absorbed. So you can see now finite absorption. So now this characteristic actually decides whether it's a direct band gap or indirect band gap, the shape of the curve. All right. So it is expected to be a direct band gap around 3.7 electron volt. Okay. So if you calculate the bond energy, it will be half of this because 2 electrons are involved in the chemical bond. So it is half of this. So what are the physical changes upon fluorination? Okay. So this is one of the evidence that it is transparent. There is an increase in lattice spacing. And also if you anneal the sample from 200 to 350 degrees Celsius, okay, maximum, you can see that there is no reversibility, that you cannot come back to the original form. So that means fluorine is chemically bonded. Okay, it is actually I think I wrote reversible. No, it is not, it is irreversible. Okay, so you have to read this as irreversible process. So if it is irreversible, that means you cannot remove fluorine from the graphene lattice. So then we say that this is actually chemically bonded. So let me share that PPT one more time. So these are some of the properties, the physical changes seen with the Raman spectra. See, so this is a pristine graphene. We all know now that there is a strong 2D peak for single layer graphene, G and no D. But after 1 hour of fluorination, you can see the intensity of 2D is decreasing, G is kind of broadened, and there is strong D peak. So we know that converting sp2 into sp3 is a kind of disorder. Okay, so that is why the disorder peak is now strong. So now after 9 hours of fluorination, see the intensity of 2D has reduced drastically, and this D peak is also enhanced. But it is not really enhanced, but there is some kind of maxima. Okay, so you cannot change too much. So once some of the fluorine atoms are attached, so this kind of partial fluorination, all right, it's just like graphene oxide. I don't know exactly the reason for this, but you can see that some of the atoms, some of the hydrogen atoms, some of the carbon atoms could form chemical bond with fluorine, but not all of them. See, you are trying to increase the fluorination time. That means you are trying to make more bonds, but it is not forming, you see. This is not changing. Okay. So there is a maximum, the fluorination time. So 2D. So the 2D peak intensity is, sorry, this D peak intensity. So this is actually always reducing, but the D peak intensity, okay, D peak intensity is maximum. That means you have created maximum disorder. So maximum attachment of fluorine on graphene lattice. So there is a maximum in the attachment of fluorine. Okay, it is very probabilistic that you cannot attach, you cannot cover all of the graphene with fluorine. You cannot attach all the carbon atoms. So if you see, so we have every carbon atom has a pi electron available. So you might think that can I attach fluorine with all these pi electrons? It seems like it is not possible. Okay, so there is some kind of maximum in the fluorination attachment of fluorine to graphene. Okay, so this is actually compared with graphite fluoride. So this is fluorographene. Actually, naturally available. This crystal is naturally available, graphite fluoride. So this is from the crystal, actually bulk crystal, whereas this is actually, so this is actually after, fluorinating for 2 weeks. So if you see this, so which is compared with the natural crystal. So there are two ways. Graphite fluoride, which is actually a crystal like graphite. So you can exfoliate and make monolayer. So this is the Raman spectra for the bulk. Okay, Raman spectra for the graphite fluoride, which is exfoliated in the monolayer form. And this is the spectra. Okay. So this has been actually smoothened. So now if you see really what is that, see, so there is a G peak for graphite fluoride. So this is the G peak. We have G peak here. And then we have a D peak. See, we have a D peak here. And then there is a 2D peak. See, very weak. So see, we also have a weak 2D peak. See here. So something like, see, the maximum is somewhere, where is the maximum? So somewhere it is maybe 5 hours in between. So I mean, this actually resembles that is indeed a fluorination is happening, because we are able to compare with the standard, the Raman spectra for, you know, the exfoliated monolayer graphite fluoride. So which is very similar to what if you fluorinate graphene. So there is a similarity. That means we are almost, that means this is actually fluorographene. Okay, fluorographene. So they are comparing with the long duration one. Okay, but if I compare this one, with some of these spectra, it seems like this is actually kind of fluorination of graphene. Yeah, so then again the TEM, transmission electron microscopy diffraction pattern. This also shows an increase in the lattice constant, lattice parameter. So it has increased from 2.46 to 2.50. So this is what we expect. So if you attach fluorine, then it's expected to have repulsion between the orbitals. Okay. So you expected to have an increase in the lattice spacing, lattice constant. So that is what we are also seeing. So the maximum. See, this is the histogram. So you can see here. So they have taken a different regions. Okay, and see that. So the maximum shift. So this one is that at some point, you know, there is the increase in lattice constant is too much. So there is actually a variation across the graphene lattice after fluorination. So this is what it shows, that the most of the regions show a lattice constant which is enhanced. So it is actually if it is 2.46, then this is something like 4748 for 2.85. So the lattice constant has been the maximum areas, okay, where fluorination happened, the lattice constant is enhanced or the lattice has expanded. Okay, and some regions we have contraction also, but this is not the majority, but the majority is this one. So we think that there is fluorination. All right. Yeah, so this is actually the absorbance which I just mentioned, that yeah, if you extend this one, it's not done. This is something like this, the fitting, kind of fitting. So you see, this is if you see the color, then this seems like something like 3.7 kind of band gap.
Hello.
Yes.
So what could be the possible reason for contraction of lattice constant in case of fluorination?
What could be yeah, so see, like what for example, if you have hole doping, okay, if you remove electrons, then there could be some contraction.
But in case of fluorination, we are shifting from sp2 to sp3, right?
So that is what I'm saying. See, it's not just about fluorine. So after fluorination, what you do, I mean, you are exposing, isn't it? So I mentioned that this is not a complete coverage. Some regions you have fluorination, but some regions you don't have.
Okay.
So those regions might undergo this hole doping. So there could be some contraction, some regions. So it is not a homogeneous doping. It is not a homogeneous bonding also. Okay. So there is no complete coverage. That is why you get this variation, but maximum areas, majority is actually expanded. So that is why they say that there is fluorination, but they have given a histogram. So you can see it actually. I mean, this is always the case, isn't it? We always, and nano, especially nano, from region to region, because of the, because so many factors, because it's all about surface. You don't know how clean the surface is. Okay.
Okay.
So some defects might be there already present. So which is not detectable in even Raman spectra. Okay. Very small concentrations. So this could all affect the final result, final fluorination. So that is actually, this is actually a mixed response. Just 1 minute. Chidesh, in between a class, 5 o'clock. Status. Are they this ongoing? Under review. And if you go up, then you can. Under review. Postdoc mentor. PI, it could be PI. Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, this is the problem with online teaching. Okay. Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
Yeah. So you understood, no? This is the problem with online teaching. You can't disconnect the internal call actually, somehow. You have to speak. Okay, so I think I'm almost done with fluorographene. So let me go to the notes. If you have any questions, you can ask me. But the main message is that you could change the graphene properties, but now based on several, the characterization techniques, characterization properties, we can say whether it is a physical bond or a chemical bond. Okay. So in the case of fluorographene, if you anneal, it actually doesn't come back. So that means this is chemically bonded. So this is one of the example. Okay. So now what else? Yeah, I think I'm almost done there. Anything else? Just 1 minute. Yeah, so I don't have any more in that topic.
Hello?
Yeah.
Sir, this fluorographene can be used in digital circuits, yes, or not?
What is that?
This fluorographene can be used in digital circuits or not? Because they have a high band gap as compared to neutral graphene. So when we apply fluorination, so they can be used in digital circuits or not?
See, the problem is too much band gap, isn't it? Too high band gap.
Okay.
So we have several other materials. So why do we want to use fluorinated graphene? Only advantage is the flux.
Use graphene only in case of digital circuits. They cannot be used. So is there any way to use graphene with some other materials in digital circuits?
In digital?
Yes, in digital circuits.
So I mentioned that last time that you can make tunnel junctions. That is one of the possibility.
Okay.
So you can have on-off ratios in a tunneling transistor, or you make a Schottky like a baristor.
But what is the problem in using a fluorinated graphene in case of digital circuits?
So, just 1 minute. Maybe I'm not clearly getting your. So you are saying that can we use fluorographene in digital applications?
Yes, sir.
But the problem
Because
is
they have band gap.
It's not the only one, no? Is it only band gap controls? No, we also want mobility.
Yeah.
But now you see, after fluorination, it is actually you can estimate the mobility is very poor. It's below 100 centimeters square.
Okay.
So we talked about the main parameters when you scale it down. So what are the different parameters we want? We want high mobility and a good band gap, reasonably good band gap. Okay, so these are the important parameters. So now your band gap has gone up, but do your mobility also remain the same? No. That is a major problem with graphene. Graphene has good mobility, but if you change graphene, then all this mobility, this high mobility is actually doesn't exist. Okay. So this is the key parameter that we want high mobility because we are competing with silicon. But when you change graphene, your mobility is also gone down because now we are introducing a lot of defect because P3 is like a defect.
Yeah.
So once you have defect, then it's not it's not usable. I mean for this application. Okay.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, due to high band gap and so when I require very high voltage application where mobility is not a concern, I think at that stage this thing can be used.
That is a point. Yeah, when a high resistance application, high voltage applications, yes, you can. Yeah. So if mobility is not a concern, so whatever I have discussed is based on the mobility. So where graphene is very attractive. So yeah, if you don't need mobility, high mobility, then you can use. See, the main point about graphene is like the flexibility. Okay, so wherever you want to use the flexibility, because you can have much higher strain, you can have much larger strains on graphene. You can bend graphene, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that advantage you can use, yes. Otherwise, silicon is also good, or any other wide band gap oxides, semiconductors are also equally good because you are not concerned about mobility. So the only advantage with graphene is the flexibility. So you have to see what is the right property you want to utilize. Then based on that, you can pick your material. Okay. Thank you, Kailash.
Okay.
So let me go to the next one. Okay. Maybe I stop sharing this. Share the note. Where is that? So you are seeing the note, no? No? Where is it? Are you seeing this?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The PDF, no? The lecture notes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good. So now we are going to the new topic, that membrane. So here the idea is, see, so much talked about graphene, 2D materials, that it is actually, people said it is one of the breakthrough material because thickness matters in all these applications. Membrane properties in membrane science and technology, thickness matters a lot because the flex in all the membrane technologies, the flex is an important thing because, for example, you want to collect water from sea, you want to convert sea water into pure water, and you want to collect maximum. No, you don't want to sit whole day for a bucket of water, so you want high flux. At the same time, you don't want any ions also, maybe little bit of ions. Okay, but generally what you do, I mean, you filter out all the ions and then add some ions like mineral water. You don't want any unnecessary ions. So that is why people usually do in the desalination industry. So I said the advantage with 2D material is that you can make it very thin. So your the flux will be very high. So people talk about the separation or the selectivity also. So now the question is, can you make these membranes? Can you design these 2D material based membranes? You design in such a way that you should have maximum ion rejection. So I'm taking the example of desalination, but this is applicable to any other application also where you want separation between two entities. It could be two ions, it could be two gas molecules, or it could be between some other like alcohol versus some water, or oil versus water, because you want oil separations, you want to avoid oil contamination, or you want some proton versus deuteron, or proton versus protium versus deuterium separation, isotope separations. So these are the applications where these tiny membranes, the thickness matters a lot. So the basic essence is you can make materials very thin and the flux can be very high. But the question is how to actually design membranes so that you can reject some of them, so that you have only one kind of entities and one kind of species is transported. So I'll just briefly discuss about graphene oxide, because graphene, I hope many of you understand what is hydrophobicity and hydrophilicity. If you take graphene, which is hydrophobic, so it is not compatible with water solvents. Okay, any water light application, just like I mentioned, desalination, it's not very compatible because graphene is hydrophobic. So you have to note this point. When I mention graphene is not very useful for water related applications, I'm saying that be cautioned. Okay, this is not entirely a correct statement. So, but generally, what you do, because graphene is not compatible to water, you convert graphene into graphene oxide. So this is called oxidation of graphite. So you take a bunch of graphite and then oxidize it. And then this oxide, graphene oxide, is compatible, is hydrophilic, means is water loving. Hydrophilic means is water loving. So it is actually compatible with water related applications. All right. So here I have given some method, general method. This is not a Hammers method, where you can convert graphene. When I say graphene oxide, it means it has regions of graphene which is oxidized. So graphene, we know it is one layer of graphite. So you start with graphite and then you make it, one layer of graphene oxide. So you assemble one layer of graphene oxide, you can make membranes if you assemble. So the oxidation is generally done with potassium permanganate, strong oxidizing agent, sulfuric acid, and then to avoid the violent reactions, you cool down with ice. So you can separate, and we know we have learned this method of you expand. So oxidation will expand the interlayer spacing. So we know how to intercalate, isn't it? So this is the process of intercalation. Some entities has to be inserted in between the graphite layers so that it is easy to exfoliate. So that is the procedure here is done. At the same time, some oxidation is also done. So graphite is, and each graphene layer is oxidized also. So some regions not fully oxidized, again, some regions are oxidized, just like the fluorination I mentioned. In the case of graphene oxide, some regions of graphite, when I say graphite, each layer of graphite, that is graphene, is oxidized, partially oxidized, and you can, once the oxygen or oxygen entities like carboxyl groups, hydroxyl groups, carbonyl groups, etc. attached to graphene, they expand. And this expanded graphene can be ultrasonicated. And then you can exfoliate. So that will be exfoliated, because we know how to exfoliate. We typically do it by expansion. We intercalate something in between the layers and then expand it. So ultrasonication actually helps to exfoliate. Okay, and then you get something like the graphene oxide. If the expansion is not done fully, then you will get graphite oxide. Okay, when I say graphene oxide, you assume that we have graphene layers which are oxidized. Okay, generally you get some after ultrasonication, you get graphite oxide and graphene oxide. So using centrifugation, which is based on the mass, you can actually isolate thin and thick flakes. Okay, graphite oxide versus graphene oxide. You can separate, and then finally you can have graphene oxide solution. Okay, which can be now transferred to any of the supports. Okay, it can be transferred to any other porous support or porous substrate, so that it can be used for filtration filtration. Okay, so we have, so once you have this graphene oxide solution, you transfer this on a substrate. So this substrate is actually porous. So let me show you something. So here, so this is what the graphene oxide. See, some regions of graphene are pristine. They are not oxidized, but some other regions are oxidized. So it can have different kinds of functional groups. It can have, C double bond O, because there is a carbon in graphene at the hexagon. So at some point it can have C double bond O, or it can be COOH. Okay, carboxylic group. So carbonyl, carboxylic, and then hydroxyl also. So you can have different, hydrogen should be there somewhere. Okay, check. So hydroxyl groups, these are all possible actually. Different functional groups can be attached during this process, this oxidation process. And only some regions are oxidized, not all the regions are oxidized. Something like 40 to 60% of the graphite is oxidized. Okay. So now this is hydrophilic. This region is, so generally the graphene oxide as a whole is hydrophilic, because some regions can attract water. So it is compatible. It is soluble in, it is dispersible in, not soluble, it is dispersible in solvents, water solvents. So see, so now if you take this and put it on a substrate, so this is the way. So you have a supporting substrate here, supporting substrate. If you drop the solution, graphene oxide solution, then this will assemble something like this. Okay, so these are the flakes, graphene flakes. Okay, some regions are oxidized. For example, if I zoom it, you see some regions are oxidized. So this is, some regions are not oxidized. So I'm taking one of this. So one of the flake, and if you closely examine the flake, you will see that some regions are oxidized. Okay, some regions are oxidized. It has some functional groups, but some other regions are not oxidized. So they still have the pristine graphene, a graphene structure, and some other regions are oxidized. So this is what you see microscopically. You see each flake has this kind of microstructure. Okay, so now, so you have regions of hydrophilicity where this region is water loving, and this region is water, should I say hate? What should be the right word? Opposite to love. Can someone tell me?
Repelling, you can say.
Not loving. Not so loving. Okay, so you can have this kind of regions. Okay, so this is what the graphene oxide is about. So you have flakes because after the ultrasonication, the big graphite is kind of disintegrated. Okay, because it generate ultrasonication generate defect also. So wherever you have some weak links, it actually breaks from there, and you have this kind of flakes. So if you start with, for example, 100 micron size, you may end up at something like 10 micron after the ultrasonication. And it also depends on the power and the time of ultrasonication. So if you control the, actually you can control this depending upon the application. All right. So, but generally this is what the structure look like. The size can vary from, can vary by choosing parameters, okay, ultrasonication parameters. So now my question is, can we use this structure for water filtration or purification of seawater? Can I use this? So people try to make this kind of structures, and the beauty is that you can make this. So this is, if I say that the transport is across, then this thickness, so this is my thickness, okay. So this is the thickness of the membrane, because I drop cast. So I have a supporting substrate here, which is porous, okay, and I drop cast or I do vacuum filtration, and then I assemble all the laminates. So this is known as the graphene laminate, okay, because it has a laminar kind of structure. So now there are spaces in between. Because they don't actually, they don't fully interlock. There is some space. So this is called the pinholes. And also there is a space in between. So this is known as the interlayer spacing. Between the layers there is space, and now the water can actually permeate. It can be transported through these spaces, okay. So there is a space in between the flake, and there is a space between the flakes, okay. So this is actually known as the pinholes, and this is known as the interlayer spacing. So you see, now if you do an XRD, X-ray diffraction, you will see kind of a new periodicity. See, there is graphene here, which is crystalline, but there is also one more periodicity. See, this is like a kind of periodic structure. So you will see one new X-ray diffraction peak, which is a result of a new periodicity. So if I say it's kind of a super lattice, kind of new lattice is formed because of van der Waals interactions. So they naturally tend to form kind of laminar structure, okay, because we have graphite which is layered. So when you try to assemble these graphene layers, it naturally tend to form kind of, because there is a van der Waals interaction, so they naturally tend to form kind of laminates, kind of this kind of layered structure, okay. And there are passages in between, and this is what generally people explore. So now again I am saying that it is not just only for graphene, but any 2D material is possible to have this kind of configuration, okay. So this is true for any other 2D materials. So you can think of assembling structures of for a particular application with a desired configuration, okay. But generally they tend to form this kind of structure. Now the size of the flake, the separation between the flakes, the spacing between the layers, everything is controllable parameter. So you have much more freedom to play with the flux and the separation between the species, okay. So this is what the microstructure of graphene oxide look like. So the flux, so now everything is determined by the thickness of the membrane. So this is the thickness. So the thickness is controlled by the concentration of the graphene flakes, okay. So if you have less graphene flakes, then your thickness will be less, but if you have a concentrated solution, then you will have more. So you can control. So your thickness can be controlled and you can make very thin membranes, something like 5 nanometer, you know. So if you see the typical membranes used in the RO, reverse osmosis membranes for water desalination. So that is of something like 20 nanometer. Okay, but in the case of graphene oxide, you can even make it very thin. But only thing is you have to worry about these pinholes. You have to worry about pinholes. So it's all about engineering issue now. It's not about scientific issue, but it's an engineering issue. You engineers can try to engineer this structure so that you get the best efficiencies. You want higher separation or higher rejection efficiencies, rejection for a particular ion or gas molecule, and you want maximum flux for a particular species. So you can actually tailor made for a particular application. So now let me go back to the notes. Yeah, so this is what. So what people have tried, people have tried to do experiment with this graphene oxide. So it's very interesting that people found some very exciting result, okay, with this configuration, which I have discussed. What they found is that water can easily pass through, okay, and the flux, the way, so this is what typical way people measure the water flux. So if you have something, some membrane with some water, and then you measure the weight loss, okay, because water evaporates and escape. So the water content inside the membrane or outside, just inside the container, will be less after the evaporation. So now if you see, if I have an open aperture, there is no graphene oxide. If I have an open aperture, this is what the weight loss. Okay, this is what the evaporation rate. So weight loss is an indication of the evaporation, water evaporation rate. So, but now if you have graphene oxide, this is micrometer thick graphene oxide. See, the water flux is also, water evaporation rate is also equally good, as if like there is no barrier. But now if you try other solvents like ethanol, hexane, it is really small. See, this is the line. So there is no permeation of this ethanol, hexane through graphene oxide. So something is very fishy about water. So graphene oxide actually allows only water molecules to, even helium also. There is no even helium molecule also will not be transported through graphene oxide. Okay, but it actually preferentially transport water molecules. So this could be one of the potential candidate for desalination, because we want only water to be transported, not any other entities. Okay. So the reason for this is simply because of capillary pressure. So I had shown you the microstructure of graphene oxide, that there are regions of graphene and some regions of oxidized graphene. So now at graphene we have push effect, means water is pushed away, whereas in graphene oxide regions it is pulled. So you have kind of push-pull train effect. So the water is pulled by the oxidized regions, whereas the pristine graphene regions, push the water molecules. So you have kind of intake of water molecules through this push-pull effect. Okay, and obviously the pull is because of the capillary pressure. So in a moment I will discuss this capillary pressure, but this is what the explanation for the high water flux through graphene oxide. Okay, so graphene oxide is hydrophilic and graphene is hydrophobic. So you have kind of, so for example, when it enters here, you have graphene oxide, especially at the edges. The edges are functionalized. Okay, edges are very reactive, isn't it? So mostly the functional groups are at the edges, and in between the edges, so it is actually pristine. So here you have pull effect, because it is hydrophilic. And then once it enters, in between this pristine graphene, you have a push effect. It is pushed. And then again, at the edges, it is pulled. So this way it is actually transported. And it is really fast. And the flux is equally good, like as if like there is no barrier. So you see the flux. So this is the water evaporation rate. Weight loss is a measure of water evaporation rate. And it is actually very high, the water flux. We'll quantify this, but from this graph, it indicates that water is preferentially transported through graphene oxide, through this push-pull effect. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some calculations. So this, I mentioned that there is interlayer separation. This layers of graphene oxide, or the graphene oxide layer, is separated by some interlayer spacing. Between these layers, there is interlayer spacing, and this typically varies from 8 angstrom to 14 angstrom. So why this 8 angstrom? Even if you have a dry condition, that means you don't have any humidity, still you will see that this is 8 angstrom. Okay, so if you take simply graphite, okay, if it is just a 2-layer graphene, the spacing, the interlayer spacing in graphite is 3.4 angstrom. 3.4 angstrom. But here in between the flakes, it is 8 angstrom. So we have learned that if you have simple graphene, just simple graphene, then nothing could pass through. I mean, we did a calculation also in the class, isn't it? That nothing could pass through, even the atomic hydrogen also. Atomic hydrogen also cannot pass through because there is no space through graphene lattice. So now we have made, so this is a point to remember, that there is nothing through graphene flake, graphene oxide flake. It's only in between the graphene flake and between the flakes, between the layers. So this interlayer spacing, because this plays an important role. See, mostly these pinholes won't be connected. If it is connected, then you will see it actually. Even if you change this interlayer spacing, you won't see any effect. So you can always verify the role of interlayer spacing in the transport. So, but we assume that if you have many of these flakes, maybe if you have smaller flake size, if you have smaller size flake size, then the chances of these pores connected may be very high. But if you have bigger flakes, then chances of these pores connected, the direct, the path is very less. So in this picture, I assume that we have large flakes, so that the transport is, between the flake, between the pores, the pores between the flakes and the space between the layers. Okay, space between the layers. So this is the kind of mechanism. So now what I'm talking about is the spacing between the layers. So I said you can see a difference in the interlayer spacing when you have dry state or when you immerse inside water. So dry state means you have like the lowest humidity condition. When I say lowest humidity condition, that practically you can have something like 5% humidity condition. If you keep molecular sieves, you can have 5% humidity. So under this condition, people have noticed that the spacing between these interlayers, so interlayer spacing, that is something like 8 angstrom. Okay, but when you immerse inside liquid water, then this spacing increases to 14 angstrom. So there is a difference. So what is the difference? What is intercalating? So there is some kind of intercalation. So intercalation is the insertion of water molecules, in this case, in between the layers. So now how many layers of water molecules are intercalated? The spacing actually depends on that. So when I say it has an effect, so your humidity is going to control the interlayer spacing, because dry state means my humidity is very little, and under liquid water means you have 100% humidity. Okay, so this is what the interlayer spacing look like. So this is actually a controllable parameter that you can actually control the interlayer spacing. And this is also possible, this is also controllable by carefully choosing the flake sizes. Okay, so now there are different processes where you can transport the species. So these are some of the fundamental interactions you can use. Okay, so electrostatic interactions, for example, if the incoming species is charged, for example DNA molecule, so then there will be electrostatic interaction between the entities, because you have functional groups which is actually negatively charged. Okay, so if you are in entity like ions, if you are talking about ion separations, then if the incoming ion is charged, and that will interact with the charge, the functional groups. So now if there is no, like a water molecule, so there is no charge, so now but it has dipoles, so this will not interact with the functional groups. I mean, at least electrostatic, there is no electrostatic interaction, but there is something called steric interaction, because this is governed by the size. If, for example, this opening is much smaller than the water molecule size, then it cannot enter. So we say that it's sterically blocked. So it is create a steric hindrance, or it can have some kind of van der Waals interactions. So this is a dipole interaction, isn't it? So water molecule is a dipole, so it can interact with the layers through van der Waals interactions. So this is like the hydrophilicity and hydrophobicity. So these are the different kind of interactions this species is undergoing, and you can actually control these interactions and then be able to transport preferentially or selectively through these structures. So you have lots of possibilities here. So depending upon the functional groups, its charges, whether it's positive or negative, what is the size in between them, or what is the kind of functional groups you have, whether it's hydrophobic, hydrophilic, or is it super hydrophobic or super hydrophilic. So you have lots of possibilities here to control the transport of the species. So this is what essentially the idea behind this kind of membranes. Okay. So yeah, so I'm going to explain this this number 8 Armstrong to 14 Armstrong very soon. Maybe I just yeah, so maybe I give you the number. Let me see if I have number or no. Yeah, so I'm going to give you this number here. So I said it's changing from 8 Armstrong to 14 Armstrong. So why this 8 Armstrong? Because if you take the van der Waals radius of carbon is as 1.7 Armstrong, and we have used this one in our calculation for checking the transport of hydrogen through graphene lattice. We have used this number, van der Waals radius. So this is 1.7 Armstrong for carbon, and the diameter of water molecules 2.8 Armstrong. So now if I say if I have one layer of water molecule in between the graphene layers, graphene oxide layers, then this will give you. So this is, see, we have carbon radius coming out. So this is what the interlayer look like. Okay, this is carbon, and here also you have carbon, and this is water molecule. So now, so this 1.7 and the 1.7, that is 3.4 plus 2.8 Armstrong. So that comes around 6.2 Armstrong. Now if you have two layer of water molecule, then you have 6.2 Armstrong plus 2.8 Armstrong, that is 9 Armstrong. So what you have seen is an average of 8 Armstrong. So that means the 8 Armstrong indicates that you have 1 to 2 layers of water molecules intercalated. Okay, 1 to 2 layers of water molecules. So now in the wet state, in the liquid state, you have 14 Armstrong. So let's see what is that 14 Armstrong means. So 9 plus 2.8 plus 2.8. 9 plus 2.8 is 11.8. And then again 2.8, 14.6. So you see 11.8 to 14.6. So we see around 13 to 14 Armstrong. In XRD, the interlayer spacing is around, if you immerse under liquid water, it is 13 to 14 Armstrong. So that means we have something like 3 to 4 layers of water molecules intercalated. Okay, so the number of water molecules intercalated actually changes with humidity conditions. So even if you have, very dry condition, like 5% humidity, still you have 1 to 2 layers of water molecules intercalated. Okay, it's always in the hydrated state because it has some hydrated, the hydrophilic groups. So that takes water from environment. And that is why there is always some layer of water molecules in between, in the graphene oxide, in between the layers. Okay, so let me go back. So where am I? Okay, so yeah, so I explained this one. So this, I think you understand what is capillary pressure. The capillary pressure definition is like a soap bubble. So this is Pi minus Po, this is outside pressure and this is the internal pressure. Inside pressure and outside pressure. So this is given by the equation that 2 gamma by R, where R is the radius of the bubble or meniscus. Gamma is the surface tension or surface energy. So now you see this equation is very important in nano because your R can be very small. So you can imagine that P outside is the atmospheric pressure. So what is inside pressure? It can be very high actually. So it can be even 1000 bars. So now if you have this kind of high pressure, so maybe this capillary pressure can pull water molecules extremely fast because this pressure can actually act as the force. So this pressure can drive water molecules very fast. That is why you see very high flux rates in the case of graphene oxide. This is one of the explanation, even though people have other explanations also. But this is the most acceptable picture that we have kind of push-pull train effect. And this small meniscus actually makes the capillary pressure very high, something like 1000 bars. And that even some people even say that this actually converts the liquid water into one ice so that it is much more ordered. Maybe it's the ice terminology may not be very accurate, but I want to say that water is ordered. When I say water is ordered, see, ordered water is nothing but it's ice. Ice has a particular structure. It has a crystalline structure. So this is some kind of, it's not completely ice, but it is kind of ordered water molecules, which actually makes the permeation very fast. Okay, so this pressure actually helps. This high pressure actually helps to make the water ordered. Also, important thing is, see, this weight loss experiments. The weight loss experiments is actually done with water vapor. It's not liquid water, it's water vapor. So what happens inside the laminates? Inside the laminates, this vapor is condensed because we have very high pressure. This water vapor is condensed and then they are now liquid in between the layers or inside the graphene oxide. It behaves like a liquid and it is much more ordered. If it is not ordered, it is very random, it cannot go fast. So if you measure the flux rate per second or per hour, then you can see that the flux rate is quite high, and this is only possible if the water is quite ordered. Okay, even though we have kind of a very weird structure. several theoretical modeling says that this is only the flux rate, very high flux rate is possible only if you imagine that there is some kind of ordering between water molecules. So yeah, so this is what, so typical experiment is, see, if you want to purify water, seawater or salty water, seawater, so you have fresh water this side and this salty water the other side. So what typically happens if you have a membrane in between, for example graphene oxide, whatever the structure I have explained, so that is here. Okay, so now I said water can easily permeate through graphene oxide, but now the question is we don't want any ions from seawater to go through this. So your ideal membrane should be such that it should only allow water from here to here. But the osmosis process is something like this. In the osmosis process, this is called the forward osmosis. Here your water flux is very high, here water flux is less. Okay, and the water will diffuse from this side to that side. So it's opposite. This is called the forward osmosis. But we want the other way. We want water from here to permeate to this side. So then what happens? So we need to apply some pressure because the pressure buildup is from here to here. So this is known as the osmotic pressure. So we have to apply some pressure which is greater than the osmotic pressure so that water from this side can go to this side. So this is known as the reverse osmosis process. Typically you have to apply something like 40 to 80 bar pressure, hydrostatic pressure, to move water from this side to that side, assuming that it blocks majority of the ions. Okay, only water is allowed to pass through. All right. So this I already explained what is that. So I'm just giving an example. See, if you have a capillary tube, say I have 1 millimeter diameter capillary tube, then the capillary rise, in the case of hydrophilic tube, if you see the meniscus, okay, you can just search that hydrophilicity means it is the water is pulled up, and hydrophobicity one is pushes the water down. So in the case of hydrophilic tube, if you have 1 millimeter diameter tube, the capillary rise is something like 1.4 centimeter. See, this much water rise is there. Though your diameter is much smaller, but the rise is actually in centimeters. So you can imagine now, if we have very small diameter, the capillary rise will be very high. Okay. So this is how it works. The pressure is very high, so that is why the capillary. So your diameter is important, that R is important, and the rise will be higher. Okay, so extremely high capillary pressures are present in the nanosystems. So you can utilize that. So now what happens to the water flow? So how do we explain? Because we have very high water flux through graphene oxide. So what kind of equations, what kind of formulas we will use? So generally what we have learned is that if we have a pipe, if you have a pipe, then generally at the near the wall, the water molecules are at rest, or the velocity of the water molecule at the near the wall is 0, where you have maximum velocity at the middle of the tube. So this is known as the viscous flow, where you have, so, and viscosity determines the flow. Okay, because viscosity is nothing but it's like a resistance between the layers. So we consider kind of laminar flow here. Okay, if you assume like if you have laminar flow, not turbulent flow, if a laminar flow, then you can, in typical cases, when your wall distance is very large, then this is what the profile look like. Okay, so this is the x, this is the diameter d, and along the x-axis the velocity. So velocity has a maximum at the middle of the tube. Okay, at the middle of the across the diameter. not the middle of the tube, but it is actually middle of the circle, the diameter. Okay, but now, so this is explained, this is actually described by the Hagen-Poiseuille equation. All right, Hagen-Poiseuille equation. So in this equation, where the velocity of the water molecule at the wall is 0, maximum at the center. Okay, so do you have the equation? Yes. So I have this equation. Okay, the P rho HQ by 12 eta W by L. So I considered a rectangular kind of pipe. That is why all these things like H, W, and L. Okay. So P is the pressure because that is the driving force. Rho is the density of water. Eta is the viscosity. So now, see, this one is not there in the typical Hagen-Poiseuille equation. So now what happens? In the case of, and we can estimate. Okay. So forget about this term. Make this term 0 and you have only this one. Make delta equal to 0. So if you estimate the, so this is the equation for liquid water transport. So the Q is the flow rate, okay, the flux. So now if you calculate the Q for graphene oxide, you will see that this is actually much smaller, almost like 1000 times smaller. 1000 times smaller than the actually measured value. So that means there is something wrong with this formula in the nano regime. So this is the formula for the bulk regime. So now what happens actually? What is the kind of correction we need to make if you want to actually describe the flow in the nano systems? So this is what the typical, the velocity profile look like. So this is known as the slip flow. Okay. So this is known as slip free. So I will explain to you what is slip. So see at the wall, in this picture, at the wall, the water molecules have some velocity, some finite velocity, not 0. See here it is 0, but in this flow, this is known as the slip flow. So there is a finite velocity at the wall. It is not 0. All right. And still the maximum is at the center, but there is still a velocity at the wall. How is it possible that at the wall still the water molecules have some velocity? Can you someone explain? How do you visualize? See, I said water molecules at the wall has some velocity. How do you visualize that? Kailash? अभी भी है?
Yes, sir. So what did you say?
So how do you explain this? See, I said typically we have the flow velocity 0.
Yes.
But here I said water molecules have some velocity, finite velocity. It's not 0. So how do you visualize this?
So visualizing as in
yeah, when I say the water molecules have some velocity.
Yeah.
So how is it possible? I mean, how can you like understand this picture? So I can explain this one. So how do we visualize? The water molecules are kind of, billiard balls. Like slip, it's like a skipping. So it is not a slipping. So water molecules are like jumping, something like this. Okay. So they are actually not, they have some finite velocity. So water molecules at the wall has some velocity. So they are kind of slipping at the wall because the walls are considered to be hydrophobic. So this picture is true for hydrophobic systems. Okay, I'm bringing the hydrophobicity here. So see, I mentioned that it's hydrophobicity. Because of the hydrophobic interaction, what happens? Water molecules near the wall has some velocity because this force, hydrophobic force, will try to repel water molecules. Okay, so this is like a slipping jet. So that is what this picture is about. So water molecule has some slip length. So this delta is the slip length. So this slip length in the case of hydrophobic wall is from like 10 to 100 nanometers. Maybe I should write as 1 to 100 nanometers. But in the case of micrometer walls, micrometer diameter systems, delta is 0. Delta is 0, means very small. But if you take nano systems, this can be, the flow can be greatly affected. So then your Hagen-Poiseuille equation needs to modify. So this is what the modification is about. So this term is now much higher than 1. Okay, this is not a small correction, it is a big correction actually. It is greater than 1. Because delta is, if I consider 100 nanometer, H is now like very small, 1 nanometer. So this is like, if it is 100 and is 1, then this is 600 times. So I said it's like the flux rate was like, there is a discrepancy of 1000, something like 1000. What you measured and what typical Hagen-Poiseuille equations predict. So this actually explains the situation, the picture in nanosystems, especially graphene oxide. All right. And here also you can see now in the case of membranes, see L is nothing but the thickness. So the Q, flux rate, is inversely proportional to thickness. So smaller the L, smaller the thickness, the larger the flux. Okay. So I have mentioned all the terms here. So this is about the calculating the interlayer spacing D. So I think you're almost now got the picture of what it looked like, the water flow looked like inside the graphene oxide. Because we have graphene, which is hydrophobic, so we can imagine that. Okay, maybe yeah. So we can imagine like the push-pull effect, where it is pulled by the capillary pressure and then pushed by the hydrophobic walls. So you have a hydrophobic wall, and then this is pushed at this rate. Okay, so this is a correction. So this actually almost explains the measured flux rates. So this is the right equation one has to use, not only for graphene but carbon nanotubes and other hydrophobic systems. Okay, so this is the most attractive feature of 2D material, that flux is inversely proportional to thickness. So this is used in other applications also. It's not just about water transport, but gas molecules, transport of gas molecules. If you want higher flux, go for thin membranes. So I talked about almost the gas kind of gas transport. I mean liquid transport I explained. So we can also understand the gas transport, because we started with water vapor. We can actually model the gas experiments also. So typically what happens, see this is actually important, because in the weight loss measurements, we have used water vapor as the feed. So we expected that we should use the formulas related to water vapor. Okay, I'll explain that one. So typically what you have is, so this is the pipe. So you have some molecules, say gas molecules. So here you can assume like water vapor molecules. So typically in viscous flow, the interaction between the molecule is the most important, because typically the walls, I mean there are only two interactions possible here, either between the molecules or between the molecule and the wall. So now which one is dominant? Everything depends on the sizes involved. Okay, so if the wall distance, the wall diameter is much larger than the interaction between the mean free path of the molecules, then the molecule to molecule interaction is important. Okay, so this is known as a typical viscous flow. But now if you reduce the dimension, reduce the diameter of the pipe or the channel, or in our case we can say it's interlayer spacing. If you make it very small, then the wall is the most important entity. The interaction between molecule and wall is the most important interaction. So then we say we have kind of Knudsen flow. Okay, and this is the formula for Knudsen flow. Okay, so here actually this Knudsen flow depends on the molecular weight, so you can calculate. So we have estimated for graphene oxide, if you think that this is the water vapor which is passing through the graphene oxide, you can estimate the flow rate. But again, it's found that this flow rate is much smaller than the measured flow rates. So again, so that these are the some of the evidences that inside the graphene oxide, it is actually liquid flow, not water vapor. So this is some of the evidences. Okay, so it's like the 10⁴ times greater than the Knudsen formula. So this is what the understanding, that water inside graphene oxide behaves like a liquid, not in gaseous state, like water vapor state. So now if you make it very small, see now if you make it very small, so that the molecular size, is comparable to the diameter. So then we have a picture called molecular sieving. So you can, so this is one of the possibility with this membrane, that you can make the diameter, the interlayer spacing so small that it is comparable to the kinetic diameter of gaseous molecules. So then you can actually separate one kind of molecule from the other based on the diameter. So this is known as the molecular sieving. So it's a sieving effect because it's based on the, whereas the Knudsen effect is based on the molecular weight, m. But in the case of molecular sieving, it is based on the diameter, okay, kinetic diameter of the gaseous molecules. So smaller gaseous molecules easily pass through, whereas bigger gaseous molecules are blocked. So this is essentially molecular sieving. So this means if you want to achieve molecular sieving, you have to have very small diameters. So if I give you an example, that hydrogen and helium, these molecules have typically the kinetic diameter of 2 to 3 angstrom. So if you want to block one of the molecule, then you should have separations in this range. So this is where the new technologies or new membranes are useful. So this is where the new research direction is going on, that how to separate molecules based on the diameters. So this is known as the molecular sieving. So this already explained. Yeah, so now you can have ion sieving also. So maybe in the next class I will explain this. Yeah, we are almost there. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I'm done for today. I think you're also. You have any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye.